I introduced you some time ago to Guy Shrubsole, not long ago actually. It coincided with the publication of his book, The Lie of the Land. And I said to you at the time that here was a fella that I suspected we'd be hearing more from in the future, because his fields of expertise coincided so completely with some of the things that we have developed a burgeoning interest in together. Not least that business about the landowning elite trousering billions and billions of taxpayer pounds, a conversation not entirely irrelevant to the one that we're having about benefit cuts today. And of course, his other book, the one that was published before The Lie of the Land, was entitled Who Owns England? And unless I've misunderstood the story, then the government is poised, I think, Guy Shrubsole, the government is poised to actually answer your question.
Yes, well, hello, James. It's lovely to chat to you again. I'm quite excited because late last week, the government actually quietly announced plans to start to open up the Land Registry, which is the official body that registers who owns land in this country. And, we've talked before about who owns land in England and how it's one of our oldest and darkest secrets. It's a story that goes back to literally to the Norman Conquest, and William the Conqueror coming over and declaring all the land in England is his, and then he parceled it out to some of his mates. And it's always been bound up with wealth and power in England. And we know from various statistics that the government have released, and through a lot of work to try and comb through data, farm subsidy payments, and other such things, that something like 1% of the population owns half the land in England. But what we haven't known up until this point is the full details of who owns all of that land. And that's why I was pretty excited that late last week, Minister Matthew Pennycook, he's the housing minister, and he's ultimately in charge of the Land Registry. He sent them a letter saying that he wants them to widen and deepen transparency of land ownership and control, to work on opening up existing data and information on land, to prioritise free access to data. That means dropping fees to search the Land Registry, and to make rapid progress towards enabling others to map Land Registry data. And this is really, really significant because at the moment, you can find out who owns land by going to the Land Registry, but you have to pay them a fee, and you have to pay them £7 to find out who owns a single parcel of land. There are 24 million land parcels registered with the Land Registry. So you do the maths, and if you're, somebody like you and I, you'd have to pay £168 million to find out who owns all the land in England and Wales. Now, most of us don't have that money to hand, so it's obvious that to have more transparency around who owns land, we're going to have to see changes to that. We're going to have to see the government drop the search fees.
What do we think Pennycook's motivation is? Is it going to tally with yours, or is there any alternative reading of the facts?
I mean, I think the minister. I mean, he outlines in his letter that he sees this as helping with house building in this country.
So if I want to build some houses on that perfectly suitable package of land over there, at the moment, it would be quite hard to find out who it belongs to. Even if I pay the money, it might end up being a succession of offshore trusts or something like that. Exactly. This is just going to massively increase transparency, and therefore, I think you use the phrase innovation and growth by boosting these startup businesses.
Absolutely. And there's all sorts of things that opening up the Land Registry would help with. It would help with understanding inequalities of wealth and land ownership in this country. It would help locate better where Russian oligarchs or other overseas billionaires are stashing money in the UK property market. But it would also help to just uncover where developers and other landowners are land banking and are contributing to high house prices and housing crisis.
I think land banking is in the news today, but I don't want to jump the gun. But before I do that, who is likely to resist this? I don't think they'll be very successful, but apart from Russian oligarchs, who might not want the truth of who owns England to be in the public eye?
There has always been lobbying by big landowning lobby groups to try and maintain secrecy around this. But I hope they would see sense that actually in the 21st century, the public has a right to know more of this information. You can look and see what happened with Companies House a decade ago. Yeah. Companies House, you used to have to pay, I think it was like £3 for every single document about a company. in this country, that was registered in this country. They dropped all their search fees 10 years ago. That hasn't stopped or solved problems of fraudulent companies being set up, but it's certainly helped to shine a light on when it happens. And so I think the same thing would happen here with the Land Registry. And you really got to, I really hope that progressive landowners will get behind this.
It's the stuff of revolution, isn't it? 50% of the land being owned by 1% of the population, and probably a relatively small shift in distribution since 1066, as you say. When I was in Norfolk at the weekend, I'm always struck by how feudal some regions of England are. There's parts of Norfolk where you can't really breathe without paying the Earl of Leicester, and that's the kind of practice that you're. I mean, that's not technically true. You are allowed to breathe. It's parking that's the problem. But the Earl of Leicester has got his finger in more pies than Tom's thumb. It's or Tommy Horner. That's the kind of thing we're going to discover, isn't it?
Feudalism in many parts of this country has never died. That's absolutely true, yes.
Okay, so back to land banking. Front page of the Telegraph today. Farmers hit again in Rayner land grab. It's so exhausting at the moment. When I'm not feeling sorry for parents who can't afford to pay VAT on private school fees, I'm feeling desperately sorry for farmers who can't afford to pay inheritance tax on their multi-million-pound estates. Is this another demand for my undiluted sympathy that I will be unable to resist?
Well, look, if I understand what the government is actually proposing here, it's simply to go back to the situation that existed between the Second World War and the 1960s, which is when a lot of our new towns were built, a huge swathe of council housing, affordable housing in this country was built, back when actually the situation was different in terms of land values and what councils and public developers had to pay for land. And they bought land back then at what's called existing use value. In other words, the value of an acre of farmland, rather than having to pay the landowner what's called hope value. The sort of the breathless anticipation of a landowner that they might get rather than £20,000 for an acre of farmland, that they might get £2 million for an acre of farmland because in the future there might be a house built on it. And that obviously massively inflates the price of housing. It makes building affordable housing in this country incredibly difficult. And so I would totally welcome what the government seems to be proposing around changes to the land value.
Until they come for your house. I mean, that's the thing about compulsory purchasing, isn't it? I appreciate you're not a massive landowner, but you can understand why. It feels wrong. We'll think of those farms. It's probably apocryphal that are stuck between two lanes of a motorway because one man refused to give up his. It's a little bit Englishman's home is his castle territory, isn't it?
Well, let's be really clear. Residential property has never been part of compulsory purchase legislation. You simply cannot do that. And I completely agree that a government shouldn't be able to simply seize that sort of land from people. But, if you literally own a castle, if your home is a castle and 10,000 acres with it, I think actually there is more of a public interest there in saying, well, maybe we do need to build some more affordable homes in some of those areas of land.
And anything that makes that easier and removes some sticks from the spokes of the wheels of building has got to be a good thing.
Exactly. And what I really think the story you highlight in today's Telegraph shows that it's not newts or bats or environmental protections that are holding up house building in this country. It's land banking by developers and landowners.
It's people
who demand sky-high profits for when they sell their land.
You'll like this from Maria. OMG, James, I read that book and I felt like I was living in the 15th century. The aristocracy, the Church of England, the charity sector, the king, offshore investors. It's outrageous how influential these people are. And the government is complicit in true and deep reform. Just look at the challenge in the High Court to leasehold reform under the Human Rights Act. Does she have a point?
Absolutely. But, let's take the first step towards changing that.
So this is a good day.
Land Registry.
This is good news. Well done, Matthew.
Let's open up the Land Registry and let's see who owns this country and let's start taking changes.
Let's see who owns this country. Isn't that an extraordinary phrase to reflect upon? Things that you didn't realise you didn't know.